I sat alone at a corner table in the SEAL team cafeteria at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, eating lunch and reading through mission reports on my tablet. It was 12:30 hours on a Tuesday, and the place was packed with operators between training evolutions. The noise level was high, conversations overlapping, the usual energy of young warriors burning off adrenaline and testosterone. I wore simple fatigues with no visible rank insignia, no unit patches, nothing that identified who I was or what I did. My hair was pulled back in a regulation bun. I looked unremarkable, forgettable, exactly like 1,000 other military personnel you might see on any base. That was intentional. It was always intentional. Being invisible was my greatest operational advantage. I had arrived at Coronado 3 hours earlier for a classified briefing with JSOC Command about an upcoming extraction operation. The briefing wouldn't start for another 90 minutes, so I had decided to grab lunch in the SEAL cafeteria rather than the officer facility. I wanted to observe the base culture, see how operators interacted when they thought no senior leadership was watching. It was the same assessment I conducted everywhere I went. Not the official evaluation, but the real one. How did personnel treat people they assumed were beneath them or irrelevant to them? What did that reveal about their tactical awareness and cultural competence? A group of 5 corporals entered the cafeteria, fresh from what looked like water training based on their still damp uniforms. They were young, probably mid-20s, with the physical confidence and casual arrogance that came from completing Bud S and earning their tridents. They grabbed food and looked around for seating. One of them, a tall corporal with a name tape reading Johnson, noticed me sitting alone at a table meant for 6 people. He said something to his friends that I couldn't hear over the cafeteria noise, and they all laughed. Then the group walked toward my table. I continued eating, watching them approach through my peripheral vision while appearing to focus on my tablet. Johnson reached the table first, setting his tray down with casual confidence. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, his tone friendly and informal. I looked up and gestured to the empty chairs with a slight nod. No words, no particular welcome or rejection, just acknowledgement that they could sit. The 5 corporals settled around the table, arranging their trays and immediately falling into the kind of easy banter that came from working closely together. They talked about their morning training evolution, some competition between boat crews, plans for the evening. I returned my attention to my tablet, eating my lunch, seemingly unaware or uninterested in their presence. After a few minutes, another corporal, whose name tape read Martinez, leaned slightly toward me with a grin that was meant to be charming. "So what's your name?" His tone was casual, friendly, with an undertone that suggested he found me attractive and was testing whether I might be receptive to conversation. His friends glanced over, smiling, clearly entertained by Martinez making a move. I had encountered this situation dozens of times over the years. Young male operators who saw a woman alone and made assumptions that she was probably administrative staff or medical or civilian contractor, someone outside their operational world, someone who might be flattered by attention from SEALs. They never considered that the unremarkable woman eating lunch might be someone they should recognize. Someone who operated at a level they couldn't imagine. Someone whose call sign carried weight they didn't understand. I looked up from my tablet and met Martinez's eyes with a calm, neutral expression. I let the silence extend for a few seconds, watching him maintain his confident smile, completely certain that this interaction would go the way he expected. Then I answered his question with 2 words, Ghost 12. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Martinez's smile froze on his face. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his cheeks so fast I could track the blood leaving his face in real time. Johnson, who had been mid-bite, stopped moving entirely, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. The other 3 corporals, who had been engaged in their own conversation, went silent and turned to look at me with expressions of dawning horror. For approximately 3 seconds, nobody at the table moved. Nobody breathed. The 5 young SEALs sat completely frozen, processing what I had just said and understanding with terrible clarity that they had made a catastrophic error in judgment. Then Martinez's fork slipped from his hand and clattered against his tray with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden bubble of silence that had formed around our table. The noise drew attention from nearby tables. Operators who had been eating and talking glanced over to see what had happened, and when they saw me sitting calmly at a table, surrounded by 5 frozen corporals, understanding rippled outward through the cafeteria like a shockwave. Conversation stopped in expanding circles. Personnel at the nearest tables went quiet first, then the silence spread to tables further away. Within 15 seconds, a cafeteria that had been loud and energetic had become almost completely silent. With over 100 operators and support personnel all focused on our table, because everyone in the special operations community knew the call sign Ghost 12, even if most of them had never met the person who carried it, even if many of them thought it might be a legend or a composite of multiple operators rather than a single individual. Ghost 12 was the commander of the most classified hostage recovery and personnel extraction unit in JSOC, a unit that operated in denied territories where conventional rescue forces couldn't go, a unit that had conducted over 50 missions in 12 years with a perfect record, no failed extractions, no operators lost, no assets left behind. Ghost 12 appeared in impossible situations, extracted personnel who were supposed to be unrecoverable, and disappeared without trace. The unit operated so far in the shadows that even most special operations personnel didn't know the real details of what they did. And these 5 corporals had just asked Ghost 12 her name in a tone that suggested they were hitting on her in the SEAL cafeteria. Johnson found his voice first, though it came out hoarse and shaking. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, ma'am." The other corporals remained frozen, their faces showing varying degrees of shock, fear, and the sick realization that they had just humiliated themselves in front of their entire community. I took another bite of my lunch, chewing calmly, letting them sit in their discomfort for a moment longer. Not because I enjoyed their embarrassment, but because this moment, this feeling of having made a catastrophic assumption, was the foundation of what I needed to teach them. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and conversational. "What made you assume you could approach me that way?" The question hung in the air. None of them seemed to know how to answer. Martinez tried. "Ma'am, we didn't realize you didn't realize who I was, so you made assumptions based on what you saw. A woman sitting alone, no obvious rank, no unit identification. You concluded I must be someone you could treat casually, someone who would be flattered by your attention." I set down my fork and looked at each of them in turn. What you didn't do was verify. You didn't consider that someone on a SEAL base might be here for operational reasons, even if they don't advertise their credentials. You didn't think that the person you were about to treat as irrelevant might be someone who outranks and outperforms everyone in this cafeteria. Johnson's face had gone from pale to flushed red with shame. "Ma'am, there's no excuse. We were completely out of line. We'll accept whatever disciplinary action." I held up a hand, stopping him. "I'm not interested in disciplining you. I'm interested in teaching you why what just happened was a tactical vulnerability that could get people killed in the field." The 5 corporals exchanged confused glances, not understanding where this was going. I picked up my tablet and pulled up a photo, turned it so they could see. The image showed me in civilian clothes, wearing a hijab, standing in what was clearly a Middle Eastern marketplace. I looked completely unremarkable, just another woman shopping for vegetables. This photo was taken in Mosul in 2017. I was operating under deep cover, gathering intelligence on a hostage situation. 3 American contractors were being held in a building 2 blocks from where this photo was taken. Conventional rescue forces couldn't get near the location without triggering a mass casualty event. I zoomed in on the photo. I spent 6 days in that neighborhood, shopping, talking to vendors, attending mosque, being completely invisible because I looked exactly like what people expected to see. A local woman, harmless, irrelevant, not worthy of attention or suspicion. I pulled up another photo showing a building with blown-out windows. On the 7th day, I extracted all 3 contractors through a route that conventional forces said was impossible. We were out of the country within 12 hours. The enemy never knew how it happened because they never saw me as a threat. They made assumptions about who I was based on appearance. I looked at the 5 corporals. Those assumptions saved 3 American lives. But when you make the same kind of assumptions, when you judge people by appearance without verification, you create vulnerabilities. You miss threats, you dismiss assets. You compromise operations because you're not seeing clearly. The cafeteria remained almost silent, with dozens of operators listening to every word I said. Martinez spoke quietly. "Ma'am, how do we fix this? How do we learn to see better? By understanding that your first impression is always incomplete and often wrong, by verifying before assuming, by recognizing that the most effective operators, the most dangerous enemies, and the most valuable assets rarely look like what you expect them to look like." I stood up, picking up my tray. "You 5 are going to learn that lesson in detail. Report to Building 347 at 0600 tomorrow morning. Bring your gear. You're assigned to me for the next 48 hours for tactical awareness training." The 5 corporals snapped to attention. "Yes, ma'am." And Corporal Martinez, next time you want to know someone's name, try verifying who they are before you decide there's someone you can casually hit on. Martinez's face went red again, but he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Understood." I walked out of the cafeteria, aware that every eye in the room was tracking my movement. By tonight, the story would spread through the entire SEAL community. The corporals who asked Ghost 12 her name thinking she was just some random woman in the cafeteria. It would become a cautionary tale, a reminder that assumptions were dangerous, that capability couldn't be judged by appearance, that the person you dismissed might be the most accomplished operator on the base. Those 5 young SEALs were about to learn that lesson in the hardest way possible, and I was going to make sure they never forgot it. Because in my line of work, assumptions didn't just cause embarrassment. They got people killed. They caused missions to fail. They left hostages in enemy hands and operators in graves. I had spent 12 years being underestimated, dismissed, and treated as irrelevant by people who looked at me and saw nothing dangerous. I had used those assumptions as weapons, as tactical advantages that allowed me to operate in places conventional forces couldn't reach. But seeing those same assumptions in our own operators was different. It revealed gaps in their tactical awareness, blind spots that could be exploited by enemies who understood how to manipulate perception and expectation. My job wasn't just to extract hostages from impossible situations. It was to train the next generation of operators to see clearly, to question their assumptions, to understand that invisibility was the most powerful weapon in special operations. And those 5 corporals were about to get a masterclass in exactly that. Whether they could handle it remained to be seen. But by the end of 48 hours, they would either understand why Ghost 12 was a legend, or they would wash out and return to conventional operations where assumptions were less likely to be fatal. Either way, they would never look at an unremarkable woman in a cafeteria the same way again. And that, in itself, was a tactical victory worth achieving. I walked out of the cafeteria and headed toward the secure facility where my briefing would take place in an hour. Behind me, I could hear the cafeteria erupting back into conversation, dozens of voices talking excitedly about what had just happened. The story would spread fast. By evening, everyone on base would know. By tomorrow, it would reach other SEAL teams, other bases, other units. The legend of Ghost 12 would grow a little larger, become a little more mythical. That was fine. Legends had their uses. They created hesitation in enemies. They inspired confidence in the people I extracted. They reminded operators that capability came in forms that defied their expectations. But the reality behind the legend was something else entirely, something fewer people understood. Let me tell you who Ghost 12 actually is, since those 5 corporals are going to spend the next 48 hours learning it firsthand. My real name is classified at a level that requires presidential authorization to access. I've been operating under various identities for so long that sometimes I have to remind myself which one came first. For the past 12 years, I've existed primarily as a call sign, a function, a capability that appears when conventional options have been exhausted. Ghost 12. The commander of JSOC's Specialized Personnel Recovery Unit, though even that official name is classified. Most people in the special operations community just call us the Ghost Unit, if they call us anything at all. We're a unit of 12 operators, always 12, never more, never less. When someone retires or is killed, we recruit a replacement, but the number remains constant. 12 specialists who can operate anywhere in the world, under any conditions, to extract personnel from situations where conventional rescue is impossible. I became Ghost 12 9 years ago when my predecessor was killed during an extraction in Syria. Before that, I was Ghost 7, a team leader responsible for planning and executing high-risk infiltrations. I had spent 3 years in that role after being recruited from a Delta Force squadron, where I had specialized in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue. But my path to the Ghost Unit started much earlier, in circumstances that shaped everything about how I operate. I grew up in 7 different countries because my father was a CIA case officer who moved the family every few years to wherever his assignments took him. By the time I was 18, I spoke 4 languages fluently and had lived in Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Turkey. I understood how to blend into different cultures, how to observe without being observed, how to become invisible in plain sight. Those skills, learned out of necessity as a child trying to fit into constantly changing environments, became the foundation of my operational capability as an adult. I joined the Army at 19, went through infantry training, then Ranger School, then Delta selection. I was one of the first women to complete Delta's assessment and selection process, back when the program was still experimental, and most people didn't think women could handle the physical and mental demands. I proved them wrong by outperforming 70% of the male candidates and demonstrating capabilities in cultural operations and infiltration that exceeded anything the male operators could achieve in certain environments. Delta put me to work immediately. Operations in Afghanistan, where I could move through populations in ways male operators couldn't. Missions in Iraq, where my ability to speak Arabic and wear local clothing allowed me to gather intelligence that would have been impossible for conventional forces. I spent 6 years with Delta, accumulating mission experience and developing a reputation for being able to operate in denied territories where other operators would be identified and killed within hours. That's when the Ghost Unit recruited me. They had been watching my career, looking for operators who had the specific combination of skills their mission required: language capability, cultural adaptability, the psychological resilience to operate alone for extended periods, the tactical proficiency to conduct hostage rescue with minimal support, and the ability to be completely underestimated, to blend in so thoroughly that people looked right at you and saw nothing dangerous. I had all of those capabilities. Being a woman in special operations meant I had spent my entire career being underestimated and dismissed. I had learned to use that dismissal as camouflage, as tactical advantage, as the thing that allowed me to get close to targets and accomplish missions that conventional operators couldn't. The Ghost Unit specialized in exactly that kind of operation. We didn't conduct raids with overwhelming force. We didn't call in air support or operate with large teams. We infiltrated quietly, often alone, moving through enemy territory by being so unremarkable that people looked right through us. My first mission as Ghost 7 was an extraction in Yemen. An American journalist had been captured by an al-Qaeda affiliate and was being held in a compound in the mountains outside Sana'a. Conventional rescue was impossible. The compound was too well defended, the location too remote, the likelihood of killing the hostage during a raid too high. So I went in alone, spent 3 weeks establishing a cover identity as a European aid worker, lived in a village 5 kilometers from the compound, attended mosque, helped local women with their children, became part of the community to the point where nobody questioned my presence. I gathered intelligence on the compound layout, guard rotations, the hostage's exact location. And then one night, I infiltrated the compound through a drainage system that my reconnaissance had identified, reached the room where the journalist was held, neutralized 2 guards using suppressed weapons, and extracted him through the same route I had entered. We were out of Yemen within 18 hours. The terrorist group never understood how it happened. They knew the hostage had escaped, but they couldn't figure out how an American rescue team had penetrated their security without triggering any alarms or leaving any trace. They never considered that the European aid worker who had been helping in the village might be a Delta Force operator who spoke Arabic and knew how to move through their territory invisibly. That operation earned me recognition within the Ghost unit and started building the legend of Ghost 7. Over the next 3 years, I conducted 17 more extractions across 8 countries. Hostages held by terrorists, CIA officers compromised in hostile territories, military personnel trapped behind enemy lines. Every mission succeeded. Every person I was sent to extract came home alive. And every operation was conducted so quietly that most of the world never knew they had happened. Then came the Syria mission that changed everything. An American Special Forces team had been ambushed near Raqqa. 3 operators were killed immediately. 4 were captured and taken to an ISIS stronghold for execution. The terrorist group was planning to film their deaths and broadcast it as propaganda. Conventional rescue was attempted. A SEAL team conducted a raid on the compound where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held, but the intelligence was wrong. The SEALs hit an empty building and lost 2 operators in the firefight. The captured Special Forces soldiers were moved to a different location. That's when JSOC called in the Ghost unit. Our commander at the time, the original Ghost 12, developed a plan. He would infiltrate Raqqa with 3 other Ghost operators. They would locate the hostages, conduct the extraction, and get everyone out before ISIS could react. I was supposed to provide external support, coordination, and extraction planning. But I was also included in the backup plan. If the primary team was compromised, I would go in alone and complete the mission. The primary team infiltrated successfully. They located the hostages, but during the extraction, they were identified. A firefight erupted in the streets of Raqqa. Ghost 12 was killed along with Ghost 3. Ghost 5 and Ghost 9 were wounded but managed to extract with 3 of the 4 hostages. One hostage, a captain named Richardson, was left behind when the team was forced to withdraw under overwhelming enemy fire. JSOC faced a decision: launch a massive raid that would likely kill Richardson and cause significant civilian casualties, or abandon him to execution by ISIS. They chose a third option. They activated the backup plan and sent me in alone. I infiltrated Raqqa the next day, traveling through ISIS-controlled territory dressed as a refugee. I wore full conservative Islamic clothing, spoke Arabic with a Syrian accent, and carried forged documents identifying me as a displaced person from Aleppo. ISIS checkpoints stopped me 3 times. Each time I was questioned, my documents were examined, and I was allowed to pass because I looked exactly like thousands of other displaced women moving through their territory. They saw what they expected to see: a frightened refugee, harmless, not worthy of detailed scrutiny. It took me 4 days to locate where Richardson was being held. 4 days of moving through Raqqa, gathering intelligence, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. 4 days of being completely invisible while ISIS prepared to execute an American soldier. On the 5th day, I infiltrated the building where Richardson was held. Neutralized 4 guards using suppressed weapons and hand-to-hand combat. found Richardson chained in a basement room, barely conscious from torture and dehydration. I cut his chains, told him he was going home, and moved him through an extraction route I had prepared over the previous days. We traveled through the city at night, using routes that avoided checkpoints and patrols. By morning, we were outside ISIS-controlled territory. By afternoon, we were in a safe house. By evening, Richardson was on a helicopter heading to medical care. That operation, conducted alone in the heart of ISIS territory, completed an extraction that conventional forces said was impossible. It saved Richardson's life and demonstrated the full capability of Ghost Unit operations. It also cost us Ghost 12. The unit needed a new commander. JSOC reviewed all the Ghost operators and selected me. At 34 years old, I became the youngest person to ever command the unit. Ghost 12. The call sign that carried the weight of every impossible extraction, every mission that officially never happened, every person rescued from situations where rescue shouldn't have been possible. For the past 9 years, I've led the Ghost Unit through operations in 19 countries. We've conducted 53 extractions with a perfect record. No failed missions, no operators lost, no assets left behind. Some of those operations are legendary within the special operations community, even if the details remain classified. The extraction of CIA officers from Iran, the recovery of captured contractors from a Taliban compound in Afghanistan, the rescue of missionaries held by Boko Haram in Nigeria. Operations that people whisper about but can't confirm because the missions exist at classification levels that most personnel will never access. And through all of it, through every mission and every extraction, my greatest operational advantage has remained exactly what those 5 corporals encountered in the cafeteria today. People underestimate me. They look at me and see nothing dangerous, nothing threatening, nothing that suggests I'm capable of infiltrating denied territories, neutralizing guards, and extracting hostages from situations where conventional rescue fails. That underestimation, that assumption, that judgment based on appearance, is the thing that allows me to operate in places where other operators would be identified and killed immediately. But it's also a vulnerability when I see it in our own personnel. When young operators make the same kind of assumptions about people on their own base that enemies make in the field, when they judge capability by appearance instead of verifying, instead of thinking tactically, instead of questioning their first impressions. Those 5 corporals made that mistake today. They saw a woman alone in a cafeteria and made assumptions about who I was and how they could interact with me. In a cafeteria, that mistake was just embarrassing. In the field, that same mistake could compromise an operation, blow a cover identity, or get someone killed. That's why I assigned them to 48 hours of training. Not as punishment, though they clearly felt punished by the public humiliation of their error, but as education, as an opportunity to learn why assumptions were tactical vulnerabilities and how to develop the awareness necessary to operate at the highest levels. Over the next 2 days, I would show them what Ghost Unit operations actually looked like, how we planned, how we infiltrated, how we extracted, and most importantly, why being underestimated was the most powerful weapon we possessed. Some of them would learn the lesson. They would understand that their assumptions had created blind spots in their tactical awareness. They would develop the habit of questioning their first impressions and verifying before judging. Others would struggle with the lesson. Their egos wouldn't allow them to accept that their judgment had been so fundamentally wrong. They would resist the idea that someone they dismissed could be more capable than they were. The ones who learned would become better operators. The ones who resisted would remain trapped in assumptions that would limit their effectiveness for the rest of their careers. Either way, by the end of 48 hours, all 5 would understand exactly who Ghost 12 was and why that call sign commanded respect throughout the special operations community. And they would never again assume that an unremarkable woman in a cafeteria was someone they could treat casually. That alone would make the training worthwhile. Because in my line of work, every operator who learned to see clearly, who questioned their assumptions, who understood that capability transcended appearance, was an operator who became more effective and more likely to survive. And survival, in the end, was what all of this was about. At 0600 the next morning, I stood outside Building 347 waiting for my 5 new students to arrive. The building was a nondescript concrete structure on the edge of Coronado Base that housed classified training facilities. Most SEAL personnel walked past it every day without knowing what happened inside. The 5 corporals arrived at 5:55, all of them early, all carrying full tactical gear as instructed. They formed up in front of me at attention, their faces showing varying degrees of nervousness and residual embarrassment from yesterday's incident. Johnson, Martinez, Williams, Chen, and Rodriguez. I had reviewed their service records last night, all solid operators with good performance evaluations, all young enough that their assumptions hadn't yet caused catastrophic failures in the field, all trainable if they were willing to learn. At ease, I said, inside. I led them through security checkpoints that required biometric authentication and into a briefing room deep in the building's interior. The room had no windows, reinforced walls, and electronic countermeasures that prevented any signals from entering or leaving. This was where Ghost Unit conducted pre-mission planning and post-mission debriefs, where we discussed operations that couldn't be discussed anywhere else. I pulled up a presentation on the main screen showing a photo of a man in his 40s with graying hair and tired eyes. This is Thomas Morrison, American contractor working in Libya, captured by a militant group 17 days ago, being held for ransom. The U.S. government officially has no knowledge of his location or situation. I advanced to the next slide showing satellite imagery of a compound. He's being held here, approximately 40 kilometers outside Tripoli, in territory controlled by a group with ties to both criminal organizations and extremist networks. Conventional rescue is not an option. The area is too unstable, the political situation too delicate, the likelihood of civilian casualties too high. The 5 corporals study the imagery with professional focus, their embarrassment from yesterday temporarily set aside by the operational details I was presenting. This is the kind of situation the Ghost Unit handles. Morrison's family has been told he's missing and presumed dead. His company has written him off. Officially, the U.S. government is not conducting rescue operations. I looked at them directly. Unofficially, I'm going to extract him within 72 hours, and you 5 are going to observe how that extraction is planned and executed. Not because you're qualified to participate, but because watching this operation will teach you why your assumptions yesterday were dangerous. Martinez spoke up carefully. Ma'am, are we actually deploying to Libya? No, you'll observe from here through secure communications and real-time video feeds. But you'll see every aspect of the operation from initial infiltration through final extraction. Over the next 6 hours, I walked them through the complete operational plan, how I would infiltrate Tripoli using a cover identity as a French journalist, how I would gather final intelligence on the compound layout and guard patterns, how I would penetrate the security, locate Morrison, neutralize threats, and extract him through a route that would get us to the coast where a submarine would be waiting for recovery. The corporals asked intelligent questions about contingencies, about backup plans, about what would happen if various elements of the operation failed. I answered each question with the patience of someone who understood that operational planning was as much about anticipating failure as ensuring success. Then I showed them something that made all 5 of them understand why yesterday's incident in the cafeteria mattered. I pulled up a photo of myself, but I looked completely different. Older, wearing conservative Western clothing, glasses, hair styled differently. I looked like a tired European journalist who had spent too long covering conflicts in dangerous places. This is Isabel Moreau, French freelance journalist who's been covering the situation in Libya for the past 3 years. She has credentials, published articles, sources within various factions. She's been in and out of the country multiple times. Chen's eyes widened with understanding. That's you. That's me. Isabelle Moreau is a cover identity I've been building for 5 years. She's real enough that she has her own Wikipedia page, her own social media presence, her own history that can withstand detailed scrutiny. I pulled up more photos showing Isabelle in various locations, meeting with various people, always looking tired and slightly disheveled in the way journalists covering dangerous situations often looked. When I arrive in Libya tomorrow, I will be Isabelle Moreau, not Ghost 12, not an American Special Operations officer, just a journalist trying to get a story about hostage situations and ransom negotiations. Williams asked the question I had been waiting for. Ma'am, why will they believe that? Why won't they see through the cover? Because they'll make the same assumptions you made yesterday. They'll see a tired, middle-aged woman with press credentials, and they'll decide she's exactly what she appears to be. Not threatening, not dangerous, not someone who requires careful scrutiny. I advanced to another slide showing surveillance photos of the militant group's leadership. These men have survived years of conflict by being suspicious and careful, but they have blind spots. Their cultural conditioning makes them dismiss women as potential threats. Their experience with Western journalists makes them see press credentials as a ticket to access and information. I looked at the 5 corporals. They will underestimate me just like you underestimated me yesterday, and that underestimation will allow me to get close enough to extract Morrison and disappear before they understand what happened. The room was silent as they processed what I was telling them. Martinez spoke quietly. Ma'am, if yesterday had been a real operation, if you had been an enemy asset using the same techniques, then you would have completely missed the threat because you made assumptions based on my appearance. You saw what you expected to see instead of what was actually in front of you. I let that sink in. That's why your mistake yesterday wasn't just embarrassing. It was a demonstration of exactly the kind of tactical blindness that gets people killed in the field. You need to learn to see clearly, without prejudice, without assumption. That's what the next 48 hours are about. The rest of the day was spent going through every detail of the operation. I showed them intelligence reports, surveillance photos, communications intercepts. I walked them through decision trees for every contingency. I explained the backup plans and the backup plans for the backup plans. By evening, all 5 corporals understood the complexity and risk of what I was about to do. They also understood that success depended entirely on people underestimating me. The next morning, I departed for Libya. The 5 corporals remained in the operations center at Building 347, watching through secure feeds as I moved through the infiltration phase. They watched me arrive in Tripoli as Isabelle Moreau, tired and slightly disheveled, carrying camera equipment and press credentials. They watched me navigate checkpoints and establish contact with sources. They watched militants look at me and see exactly what I wanted them to see: a harmless journalist asking questions about hostage situations. For 2 days, the corporals observed as I gathered final intelligence, identified vulnerabilities in the compound security, and positioned resources for extraction. They watched me use my cover identity to get access that would have been impossible for a conventional operator. On the 3rd day, they watched the actual extraction operation unfold in real time. I approached the compound at 0300 hours, dressed in dark tactical clothing, the journalist disguise completely abandoned now that direct action was required. The corporals watched through drone feeds and helmet camera footage as I penetrated the compound perimeter, neutralized guards using suppressed weapons, and moved through the building toward where Morrison was held. They watched me locate Morrison in a basement room, bound and barely conscious. They watched me cut his restraints, administer medical aid, and move him toward the extraction route. And they watched when the operation went wrong. A guard I hadn't accounted for discovered us in a corridor. He raised an alarm before I could neutralize him. Suddenly, the entire compound was alert, armed militants converging on our position. The corporals watched as I made real-time decisions under pressure, chose a different extraction route, engaged multiple hostiles in close quarters, combat. Moved Morrison through a building that had transformed from a penetrable target to an active hostile environment. They watched me reach the compound perimeter with Morrison, fighting through resistance, calling in fire support from offshore assets, creating enough chaos to cover our escape. And they watched as we reached the coast, made contact with the submarine recovery team, and extracted successfully with Morrison alive, despite the operation having been compromised. When I returned to Coronado 36 hours later, the 5 corporals were still in the operations center, exhausted from watching the entire mission unfold without sleep. I walked in still wearing tactical gear, carrying equipment that showed evidence of hard use. Morrison is receiving medical care. He'll make a full recovery. His family will be told he's been found alive. The operation will never be officially acknowledged. I looked at the 5 exhausted corporals. "What did you learn?" Johnson spoke first. "Ma'am, I learned that underestimation is a weapon. You used people's assumptions about who you were to get close to the target. If they had seen you clearly, if they had recognized the threat, the operation would have been impossible." Martinez added, "I learned that cover identities require years of development. Isabel Moreau wasn't just a costume you put on. She was a complete person with history and credibility. That level of preparation is what makes infiltration possible." Williams said, "I learned that when operations go wrong, tactical flexibility matters more than the original plan. You adjusted in real time when you were compromised, using the chaos to create new opportunities." Chen observed, "I learned that women can operate in environments where male operators would be identified immediately. The cultural assumptions that led those militants to underestimate you created access that wouldn't exist for conventional forces." Rodriguez, who had been quiet throughout the training, spoke last. "Ma'am, I learned that when I saw you in the cafeteria and made assumptions, I was demonstrating the same tactical blindness that allowed you to operate successfully in Libya. I judged you by appearance instead of considering who you might actually be. In the field, that blindness could have gotten someone killed." I nodded, satisfied that at least some of the lesson had penetrated. All correct observations. But I want you to understand something else. The Ghost unit doesn't succeed because we're the best shooters or the strongest operators. We succeed because we understand how perception works. We know that people see what they expect to see, and we use that knowledge as a tactical advantage. I pulled up photos from various Ghost Unit operations over the years, images of operators in different disguises, different environments, different situations, all of them looking unremarkable, all of them deliberately designed to be underestimated. Every operator in this unit has been dismissed, ignored, or underestimated at some point in their career. Some because of gender, some because of size, some because of age or appearance. We've all experienced what you did to me in the cafeteria. We've all been judged by people who didn't look past surface appearance. I looked at them directly. The difference is, we learned to weaponize that experience. We learned that being underestimated was an advantage, not a limitation. We learned to blend in so thoroughly that people looked right at us and saw nothing threatening. I advanced to the final slide, showing the Ghost Unit's operational record. 53 missions, 53 successful extractions, 0 failures. This record exists because we operate in a space between assumption and reality. We look like what people expect to see right up until the moment we don't, and by then, the operation is already complete. The 5 corporals sat silently, processing everything they had learned over the past 48 hours. You came here because you made a mistake in a cafeteria. You're leaving with an understanding of why that mistake revealed a tactical vulnerability. Some of you will take this lesson and become better operators. Some of you will forget it as soon as you return to your regular units. That's your choice. I stood. But I want you to remember something. Every person you encounter might be more than they appear. Every situation contains information you're missing. Every assumption you make is a potential blind spot that enemies can exploit. I looked at each of them. The next time you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations of what an operator or asset or threat looks like, remember this moment. Remember Ghost 12 sitting in a cafeteria being dismissed by operators who didn't know any better. And ask yourself whether you're seeing clearly or just seeing what you expect to see. Dismissed. The 5 corporals stood, saluted, and filed out of the operations center. I watched them go, knowing that this training would shape their careers in ways they probably didn't yet understand. Some would internalize the lesson and become exceptional operators who saw situations clearly without prejudice. Others would revert to their assumptions as soon as the immediate impact of this training faded. But all of them would carry the story. The day they asked Ghost 12 her name, thinking she was just some woman in a cafeteria, the 48 hours of training that followed, the extraction operation they watched unfold in real time, that story would spread. It would become part of SEAL community culture, another reminder that assumptions were dangerous and capability couldn't be judged by appearance, and that, in the end, was worth the time and effort of teaching. 3 years after that cafeteria incident, I stood in a different operations center watching a mission I wasn't conducting myself. Corporal Johnson, now a petty officer first class, was executing his first solo extraction in Somalia. I watched through satellite feeds as he moved through Mogadishu using techniques I had taught him about blending in and being underestimated. He looked unremarkable, moved like he belonged, used every lesson I had drilled into him, and he was succeeding where conventional rescue had failed. Martinez sat beside me, now assigned to Ghost Unit Intelligence Operations. He had transitioned from field operator to analyst, applying lessons about questioning assumptions to intelligence assessment. Williams had been recruited into the Ghost Unit 2 years ago as Ghost 9. Chen and Rodriguez had returned to their SEAL teams as instructors, teaching cultural awareness to hundreds of young operators. The cultural shift was measurable. After that cafeteria incident became a widely told story in the SEAL community, assumptions about capability based on appearance had decreased across multiple units. Female operators reported better treatment. Smaller operators were evaluated on performance rather than physical presence. The Ghost Unit had conducted 68 successful extractions since that day. Our perfect record remained intact, and the operational techniques we had refined were being adopted by other special operations units. Last month at JSOC headquarters, a young lieutenant presented intelligence from local female sources in a conservative society. 5 years ago, that intelligence would have been dismissed. Now, the entire briefing room understood those sources had access that male sources couldn't provide. The lieutenant's presentation reflected sophisticated understanding of how perception created intelligence opportunities. After the briefing, he approached me. "Ma'am, I went through cultural awareness training based on Ghost Unit methods. It completely changed how I assess situations. The intelligence we gathered only existed because we didn't make assumptions about who could provide valuable information. That training had spread far beyond the 5 corporals I taught 3 years ago. It was now standard curriculum across multiple special operations programs. 2 weeks ago, Martinez sent me a message. "Ma'am, I just taught a course on intelligence assessment. When asked how to identify valuable sources, I told the story about Ghost 12 in the cafeteria. Thank you for teaching me to see clearly." Yesterday at Fort Bragg, a young ranger saw me in civilian clothes and politely asked to verify my authorization, rather than assuming I was lost. When I showed credentials, he said, "Thank you, ma'am. We were briefed about Ghost 12 and the importance of verifying before assuming." The lesson had become embedded in military culture through stories, through training, through thousands of operators learning and teaching others. But my role was evolving. At 45, after 17 years in special operations and 12 commanding the Ghost Unit, I was approaching the end of my operational career. JSOC asked me to transition to training development and cultural transformation across all special operations forces. Last week, I conducted my final operation as Ghost 12, an extraction in Venezuela requiring 3 weeks of deep cover infiltration, followed by high-risk rescue of 2 American contractors. The operation succeeded. Tomorrow, I would officially transition. Ghost 12 would pass to my successor. The unit would continue under new leadership. Tonight, I watched Johnson complete his Somalia extraction successfully, his first solo mission with 0 complications, and the assets safely recovered. I felt something I rarely allowed myself: pride. Not in my own accomplishments, but in what the operators I trained were achieving. Johnson had internalized the lessons. Martinez, Chen, and Rodriguez were spreading them to others. Williams was becoming an exceptional ghost operator. That was the real legacy of Ghost 12, not 68 successful extractions or the perfect operational record, but the cultural transformation that had spread through the special operations community. The understanding that the most dangerous people rarely looked dangerous, that assumptions were tactical vulnerabilities, that the person you dismissed might be the most capable operator in the room. As I walked out of the operations center for the last time as Ghost 12, I thought about that day in the cafeteria. 5 young corporals who made assumptions about an unremarkable woman eating lunch. The moment of recognition. The 48 hours of training that followed. That single incident had created ripple effects across the entire special operations community. The story had been told and retold, becoming a teaching moment for thousands of operators who learned to see clearly before making the same mistake. I passed the cafeteria where it started. Through the windows, I could see operators eating dinner, some probably telling the story right now, the legend of Ghost 12, and the corporals who didn't recognize her. That story would outlive my career. It would be told to new SEAL classes for years, a reminder that assumptions were dangerous, that the person you underestimated might be the most accomplished operator you'd ever meet. The work would continue without me in the field. The Ghost unit would keep conducting impossible extractions. The lessons would keep spreading through training and stories and cultural transformation. My role was changing, but the mission remained the same: teaching operators to see clearly, creating a culture where capability mattered more than appearance, building a community that understood perception was both weapon and vulnerability. That was worth everything. Worth 17 years of being underestimated. Worth countless operations on shadows. Worth the sacrifices and isolation and years of living as someone other than myself. Because the measure of success wasn't personal accomplishment. It was what you taught others, what you changed in the culture, what continued after you moved on. The next generation would be better equipped to operate in a complex world precisely because they had learned to see without assumptions, judge without prejudice, and understand that the most effective warriors were often the ones nobody saw coming. That was the legacy of Ghost 12. Not a perfect operational record, but a fundamental shift in how an entire community understood capability, perception, and the tactical advantages of being underestimated. The work would continue, the mission would evolve, and the legend would remain as a reminder that things were rarely what they appeared to be. The most valuable lesson was to look deeper, question harder, and verify always. Because the person eating lunch alone in a cafeteria might just be the most dangerous operator you'd ever meet, and knowing that difference could save your life.